Welcome to this day of light and gladness. We gather in this place and online knowing that whenever and wherever we gather, we create holy time and holy space. We gather on the homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe nations, and we honor today with gratitude the people who have stewarded the land throughout the generations and their ongoing contributions to this region. We gather together this day as longtime members and as friends and first-time visitors. And if this is your first time here, we encourage you to fill out a visitor card that's available in the pews and online so that we can get to know one another better. Visitors are invited to attend our Finding Yourself at Unity, which is going to happen beginning in the Gannett Room, 10:15 to 11:15. Today we're going to do a tour of the building, and so I encourage those of you who are new, and maybe those of you who would just like to know more about the building, to attend. Also encourage you to review the insert this week at Unity in your order of service, because there are so many opportunities and so many ways that you can engage with this community. And I look forward to greeting you after today's service, and also in the parish hall for refreshments and more conversation. And those of you who are joining us online can stay for a Zoom coffee hour after the service. Welcome all. We begin our time together, and we enter into this holy time by the ringing of our bell.
These are the days that have been given to us. Let us rejoice and be glad in them. These are the days of our lives. Let us live them well in love and service. These are the days of mystery and wonder. Let us cherish and celebrate them in gratitude together. These are the days that have been given to us. Let us make them stories worth telling to those who come after us. As we kindle our chalice flame, we invite one another to enter holy time. Come, let us worship together.
Please join us in these words. These are from Unity Church Unitarian's end statements, goals, aspirations. The beloved community is inherently multicultural. It is a state of being and becoming to which we aspire.
We begin this work with deep humility, acknowledging that we need help navigating what for us is uncharted territory.
Authentic relationships begin when we root out our assumptions and deepen through active curiosity and growing friendship.
This work asks us to confront systems of oppression, build bridges across difference, and embrace an ever-growing repertoire in worship and in every dimension of our ministry. Our congregational culture will be challenged and enriched. Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. And together we recognize the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is at the center of this and every sacred community. We stand at the side of parents and teachers and all whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children, with those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental disability or addiction. We pray for our neighbors in prison and those who care for family members in ill health, for those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty. And our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days. We pray for those in harm's way, for the wisdom and strength of the leaders of this world, and for the people of this courageous congregation, as together we live into our longing to embody and to help build the beloved community. Will you hold now in prayer these beloveds? We hold the family and all others who grieved the death of Rob Eller-Isaacs, whose life and ministry we celebrated yesterday. May his memory and legacy sustain us as we face the coming days. And we offer our ongoing prayers for Jan Eller-Isaacs and her recovery, and for the entire Eller-Isaacs family as they return home to Portland. We offer blessings to Sue Snyder Austin, who will have open heart surgery to replace a heart valve on Wednesday, September 21st, at the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. She welcomes prayers for her surgery and recovery, as well as her surgical team. We send caring and healing thoughts to Laurel Line, who is having her right knee replaced on September 20th, as well as Eric, who will be supporting Laurel through her recovery. And we hold in love Addison McCarl, who is dealing with a mental health issue, and we hold in love and support their parents, Heather and Mary. So I invite you now to speak aloud the names of those who are on your heart and mind today. Holy One, source of our being and our becoming, be with us now. We gather in griefs both great and small, for the loss of a friend, a colleague, a loved one, for the loss of jobs and dreams, of relationships and health, and for all the ways in which the human spirit can bend under the weight of such heaviness. Make us in those moments a true part of all humankind, sharing its hope, suffering its miseries, and striving for a better way. We also gather together in joy and gratitude for the gifts of this day, for the family and friends who nurture us, for the musicians, composers, artists, and singers whose gifts uplift our minds and our hearts and our spirits. We give thanks this day for the staff of Unity Church, whose dedication to the ministry of congregational care provides us with a sense of home. We give thanks for this church community, which continues to be a source of inspiration and aspiration. We have so much to be thankful for. Let such gratitude flow out from in, among, and beyond us, and may our thanks inspire us towards an ever deeper commitment of love and support and service. Amen. In preparation for today's service, Worship Associate Russ and I met to talk about the service and to get to know one another a little bit better, since we're both relatively new to this role. So I asked Russ to tell me about how he found Unity and why he continues to attend and support Unity Church. Realized you got a story to tell, and so I invite you to share that story with the congregation now.
Good morning again. Life for me began at 812 St. Anthony, a 16-room house on 2 lots in Rondo. The freeway came through and took our home, and our family was split up for a while. I went with my mother. My sisters and brothers and I thought that it was about 3 years that we were separated. But I was the smartest one in the family and figured out it was just 3 months. At 8 years old, we are now living over on Dayton Avenue, and the first family that looked like us there. My mother would go to work at Western Electric, and my father worked on the railroad, and he would be gone days at a time. He had a series of strokes after that move and was in a nursing home until he passed. So my mother was left with us, and when she would go to work, she would say, "Russell, I'm the youngest. Don't leave the yard." And I would watch her go down the street, and then I'd go to discover what the block had to do. And the next day she'd say, "Russell, don't leave the block." And I'd see her go off and I'd say, "I gotta go see what's going on outside this block." And she would say, "Russell, don't go up on Selby." Selby was a much different place in those days. So I had to go see what it looked like. I went up on Selby, and the police pulled me over, put me up against the wall, put my hands up against the wall. They went in my pockets. I was so skinny and so little, they could only get a couple fingers in my pocket. I was a little shaken, and I went home. I couldn't tell my mother that I was up on Selby, and the police had stopped me. So after a couple days, I got my courage up, and I headed back up there, and I crossed Selby and came down the street, and I seen this big church, Unity Church. So I went inside and struck up a conversation. The people were so nice to me and so welcoming, and I carried on and went on down to House of Hope, and it was the same type of thing. And each day I would come and go a little bit further, but this was my path. I would later go to school across the street at what was, it's Obama now, but it was Marshall Junior High School when I came through. And then I would go to, well, after that time, I was a teenager, and I was walking my path, and I seen this woman come out, a black woman. Her name was Mrs. McFarland. And I seen her come out, and I went up to her, and I said, "Mrs. McFarland, have you been to that church?" And she said, "Oh, baby, this is my church." And she went on and on about how wonderful it was and how long she had been here. And by the way, Mrs. McFarland died in 2017. She was 109 years old, and her funeral was right here. Later on, I went to college, and when I got out of college, I came and right across the street, down a ways, it's an apartment place now, but it was Capital Community Services. Then I got my first job, and it was supposed to straighten up some of the kids in the neighborhood, and And they listened to me, and those kids, a lot of them have done some great things, and I have some work with their grandkids now. Then I would come here for yoga class. And other times I would just stop in here because there was a meeting or something. Later on, I would come over here looking for volunteers to be one-to-one friends with people in our state correctional facilities. Wonderful people. I would have the trainings here. Sometimes I would see food being served, and I'd sit down and enjoy myself. And every now and then I would pop in for church. And I knew a few people in here, and they would say, I didn't see you in church, and I couldn't figure out how they could miss me. And then I came in here one day. I'm going to go back. In 2010, it was February, and the snow was melting, and I knew the gang violence was going to start again, and my oldest grandson had been shot twice, and I thought, I can't let him be shot again. I've got to sit down with these families of these gangsters, and I was told, it'd take you a year to pull that together. Well, I was born and raised here, and I knew everybody. So I went around, and I talked to people, and they would mention other people's names, and I would go to their homes, I'd get their telephone numbers, and in 1 week, I had a meeting planned, but I went to all the churches around the neighborhood, and no one would let me have a room. And I thought, unity. I came over to Unity. I talked to Rob, Eller-Isaacs. Rob said, sure, Russ, you can have a room. I said, listen, Rob, this is going to involve the family of gang members, and I don't want you to be surprised by that. He said, use the center room. Do you need any food? And I thought, no, I think we can handle the food. Thank you very much. That was in March of 2010. It was supposed to last for 4 Mondays in a row. Last Monday was our 608th meeting. No, really, I applaud you all. It's been 12 and a half years. Our meetings have changed. We have found each other and have become a family in there. After that time, I came in and I told people in the church, I'm going to Selma for the 50th anniversary of the walk across that bridge. I got a call the next day and from people from the church said, Russ, we want to go with you. I said, anybody can go. You just get a plane ticket. No, they said, we're going with you. I said, okay. But you know, it was, I came, I still get filled up. And I saw the Black Lives Matter banner on the church. And when I came to church, there were buttons in the offering, Black Lives Matter. And I knew I'd been seen. I went around and I talked to the other churches who didn't have the guts to put a banner on their church. But there was a banner on my church. This is my church.
Today's offering will be dedicated to the Barack and Michelle Obama School. And today's collection will support the Sunshine Fund, which assists both staff and scholars with expanded learning opportunities. What a testimony we just heard today. So please give generously as you are able to this morning's offering. Will the ushers now please come forward? How are you feeling? Right there. He's going to play what's going on.
When I leave home to walk to school, Dad always says to me, "Marco, keep your eyelids up and see what you can see." But when I tell him where I've been and what I think I've seen, he looks at me sternly and sternly says, "Your eyesight's much too keen. Stop telling such outlandish tales. Stop turning minnows into whales." Now, what can I say when I get home today? All the long way to school and all the way back. I've looked and I've looked and I've kept careful track. But all that I've noticed, except my own feet, was a horse and a wagon on Mulberry Street. There's nothing to tell of. That won't do, of course. Just a broken down wagon that's drawn by a horse. I swung around the corner and dashed through the gate. I ran up the steps and I felt simply great. For I had a story that no one could beat. And to think I saw it on Mulberry Street. But Dad said quite calmly, "Just draw up your stool and tell me the sights on the way home from school." There was so much to tell, I just couldn't begin. Dad looked at me sharply and pulled up his chin. He frowned at me sternly from there in his seat. Was there nothing to look at? No people to greet? Did nothing excite you or make your heart beat? "Nothing," I said, growing red as a beet, "but a plain horse and a wagon on Mulberry Street."
And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. That was one of my favorite books as a child because I, too, was that kid who didn't really see the necessity of being grounded in reality, in what was right in front of me. Instead, as children often do, I treasured my imagination. And I used it as an opportunity to create stories and worlds where trees could talk and dirt mounds became mountains. So this morning, we are not only going to take a walk down Mulberry Street for a minute with Dr. Seuss, but we're going to take another stroll down a different street, one called Berry Street, as a way to reflect on the September theme of covenant. Now, covenant is not a word most people use in daily life much. Promises is a more religiously neutral word. And most of us do recognize that promise and promises form a kind of invisible guardrail that frames everything from our most intimate relations to our relationship to our nation, to our planet, and to the holy. One church member described covenant in this way. She said, "A covenant is a promise I keep to myself about the kind of person I want to be, the kind of life I mean to have, together with other people and with all living things." So I want to dig a little deeper into this religious word, and to do so, I'm going to put us at the corner of Mulberry Street and Berry Street, a kind of crossroads for both our personal and collective reflection about what it means to live and practice a life framed by covenants, the covenants we make with one another, as well as the ones that we break. All right, so we're going to start on Mulberry Street. To think that I saw it on Mulberry Street has been rightfully honored as a celebration of childhood imagination and the pure creativity it entails. So I couldn't read the whole story to you, so I got to recap the important part. Of course, following his father's instructions to pay attention to what he sees on his walk down Mulberry Street, our young protagonist, Marco, is very disappointed by reality. So he begins to embellish. Every detail he notices on Mulberry Street suggests a new what-if possibility. What if it wasn't a horse pulling a cart, but a zebra instead? Wouldn't that be fun? And what if it wasn't just a cart, but a chariot driven by a charioteer? Well, one thing leads to another, and by the time Marco has been back and forth to school, that horse and that cart on Mulberry Street has turned into a fantastical parade of amazing people and creatures that are the product of his limitless imagination. In fact, Marco's imagination has led him so far away from what is really there on Mulberry Street that his father asked him what he saw, and Marco realizes he has nothing to say. And I also want to say, Marco's father is usually seen as the downer of this story. Really, is impatient with Marco's tendency to turn minnows into whales. What's wrong, we're led to ask, with harmless imagination and flights of fancy? Well, I am going to answer that question later on in this sermon. But for now, we're going to have to leave Mulberry Street, and I want to walk with you down and roll with you down that other street, Berry Street. Berry Street is in Massachusetts, or at least it was. Berry Street no longer exists. It is underneath a skyscraper in Boston. But even though it no longer exists, Berry Street ranks alongside nearby Beacon Street as among the best-known streets in Unitarian history. That is because Berry Street was the access street to the direct entrance into the vestry, stay with me here, of the Federal Street Church, the church where William Ellery Channing, the founding religious leader of Unitarian movement in the United States, would receive visitors and hold meetings. The vestry door entrance on Berry Street was where Channing invited all the local clergy who leaned in the Unitarian Christian direction to arrive and gather in 1820 to form a bond of union and to hear an inspiring lecture that would speak to the current movement and moment of challenge and controversy that were facing Unitarians. So 202 years later, the Berry Street Lecture, offered at the Unitarian Universalist Ministry Days held before General Assembly, is believed to be the longest-running continuous essay series and conference within our faith tradition and possibly in America itself. So it's pretty prestigious. And each year, a new essayist or panel of essayists is chosen and invited to rise to the occasion of telling the annual gathering what they see, what they believe to be true, and what they imagine are the most important movements of the heart and the mind and the spirit in our association of congregations. In 2021, your ministers emeritus, Reverend Rob and Jan Eller-Isaacs, delivered a powerful, important, and impactful Berry Street lecture which summarized the essence of their teachings that many of you have heard about the practice, about developing a deep spiritual practice. And they linked that impulse to the early roots in the Transcendentalist movement and to an innovative congregation called the Church of the Disciples. So, this past June, though gravely ill, Rob summoned all of his strength to go to 2 events at General Assembly: the Service of the Living Tradition, where he and Jan were honored with a standing ovation, and the 2022 Berry Street Lecture offered by the Reverend Michael Slack. The last hug that Reverend Michael received before going on stage to deliver this lecture was from Rob Eller-Isaacs, offering Reverend Slack encouragement to preach a good and true and lively word on the theme of covenant. And Reverend Slack did. Unlike what happens on Mulberry Street, the Berry Street Lecture doesn't entertain fanciful expressions of Unitarian Universalism. Instead, it's more like Marco's father, who asked, "What did you really see?" And the Berry Street Lecture asked to tell us not only what the speaker sees, but it seeks to uncover the reasons, for example, why the wagon is broken, and why the horse, who should be spending time in pasture, is still working overtime pulling heavy loads on Mulberry Street. So Reverend Michael Slack began by telling us that Unitarian Universalism is at a crossroads where, quote, "we have to decide whether we are going to actually be the robust, innovative, dynamic, worthwhile for all of us faith we want to be, or if we're going to coast along in the muddiness that both conflict and praxis avoidance builds, and therefore lose the people that I would argue Unitarian Universalism is actually built for," end quote. So Reverend Slack invited us to explore what he called founding and festering mythologies that shape our movement and are no longer serving us well in becoming the faith we want to be. So I want to explore with you those 3 founding and festering mythologies and here's the first one: that the beating heart of our faith is covenants rather than creeds. What? I thought to myself, no, covenants are us, right? I mean, covenants are what distinguishes us from those other faiths that make their people say creeds, right? I mean, I've heard innumerable stories about new Unitarian Universalists who were forced to mumble the Nicene Creed and realized, I don't believe a word of this. If this is what it means to be a fill in the blank, then I'm out of here. I'm proud of the fact that one of my first tasks as your interim minister has involved creating covenants with colleagues and with staff about how we will be in right relationship with one another. But here's the rub. covenants are promises we freely adopt to support each other in our individual spiritual journey and practices, and they frame the ways in which we promise to behave with one another. And when we use the phrase right relationship, we are talking about the ways in which we agree to behave with one another. So Reverend Slack continues, quote, "So perhaps the work we do to continually rely on covenant to help us do this thing better, to be in right relationship in the ways that are meaningful and that aren't just performative, needs some reconsideration. Because if a commitment to covenanting in community only extends as far as anyone's comfortability, as far as anyone's racism, as far as our ableism, as far as anyone's homophobia or transphobia will take them, then once anyone becomes confronted with lived experience outside their purview or comfort zone, covenant goes right out the window. Right relationship goes right out the window. Good intentions go out the window. And then what does it mean to recite the words that so many of us know? Love is the spirit of this church, and covenant is its law, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another." Ooh, I love that covenant. We spoke it last Sunday. But sometimes love is not the spirit of the church, and sometimes we become indifferent to service, or we're self-righteously absorbed in our own social justice efforts above everything else. Sometimes we don't dwell in peace. Sometimes we find it difficult to help one another, especially when we're hurting, or we believed our values have been betrayed. We shouldn't be surprised that we break covenants to ourselves and to one another. But what Reverend Slack rightfully challenges Unitarian Universalism on is the belief that simply making or saying covenants is enough. We have to live them out in practice, especially when it's difficult. And that leads to the second founding and festering mythology that Reverend Slack identifies, which is we're doing all right. We're doing all right. And by that, he identifies a kind of self-satisfaction, particularly among those of us who believe ourselves to be white, that Unitarian Universalism overall is, doing pretty well. I mean, we've got aspirational statements of things we're going to do or have done. We've created covenants with carefully crafted wordsmith language, but then we don't quite absorb how difficult it's going to be to make it real. It kind of reminds me of the summer, I set a set of goals for myself, which included lose 20 pounds, grow my hair out to shoulder length, run a marathon, read War and Peace, and learn Hungarian. I kid you not. Seriously. Needless to say, I didn't accomplish any of those goals that summer because just wanting something doesn't necessarily make it so. In our congregational life, we may say we want to create beloved community, and then we begin to realize just how hard it is to decenter white supremacy culture, how exhausting it is, and we're tempted to either beat ourselves up for not smashing white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, transphobism, ableism, sexism right this minute, or we lapse maybe into an easy assumption identified by Reverend Slack, like, well, maybe we're doing all right. Well, here's Reverend Slack's main point, which is a sobering corrective to the we're doing all right. He challenges us to be aware of the disconnect of the way things are and the way many of us imagine the church to be. It's kind of not unlike Marco, right? Having this vivid and active imagination which prevented him from seeing the reality of what was right in front of him. So it's me. It's me when I talk about beloved community without having real relationships with people of color outside these walls. It's me, and maybe it's you too, when the concerns of my world and my personal grief leave no room for the daily practice of decentering whiteness. It's us, Unitarian Universalism, when we realize we're doing all right, too often does not include those from historically marginalized communities who find their way to a Unitarian Universalist church. The third and final founding and festering mythology of our faith, as identified by Reverend Slack, asks us to grapple with this. Unitarian Universalist culture and Unitarian Universalist values are the same thing. Reverend Slack asks this, quote, "What are the ways UU culture is aligned with U.S. dominant culture by default, and therefore not actually aligned with UU values?" Right? I had to sit with that for a minute and really steep it. And some of those aspects of culture are above the surface and easily noticeable, Reverend Slack continues. He says, we even laugh about some of them. Priuses, NPR, coffee hour, right? Some are just below the surface and barely noticeable, but can be spotted if we're paying attention. And some of the values, symbols, history, attitudes, behavior, and so on are so deep below the surface that they are working to fuel the inner and outer workings of whole communities without anyone even noticing that those aspects of culture are present. So part of the mythology of Unitarian Universalism is that we are quintessentially an American religion aligned with the important values of the founders of this country. And even as some have questioned those values and realized that as a nation have ignored many of the racist dimensions of those values, we still like to think we are aligned with the best of American progressive values. And those progressive American values are also steeped in, you guessed it, whiteness and white culture, which creates a culture which becomes the norm. Changing one's mind and heart is hard enough, but changing the culture of a church institution is really, really difficult. It reminds me of a story my stepdaughter told me. When she was in college, she decided to visit the small Unitarian Universalist fellowship in her college town on a Sunday morning. And she was standing there awkwardly in the lobby reading a bulletin board, and she overheard one member spontaneously and enthusiastically say to another, "Look, a young person!" Oh, that one moment told her volumes about the culture of church she was about to attend and how she would or would not fit in. Now imagine how a similar comment would have landed if she were a young woman of color, or disabled, or trans, or queer. So the question at the heart of Reverend Slack's lecture is this: is it possible for us to look at Unitarian Universalism more simply, more soberly, more historically accurately as what it is today and always has been, a reflection of Enlightenment values that have been distorted and badly applied through the framework of white supremacy culture that surrounds us? So to answer that question, I have to go back to Mulberry Street for a minute. And I began by telling you how much I loved that book as a child, and I would not pull out my old copy and read it to my grandchildren today. Why? Because in Mulberry Street, Geisel's artwork and narrative included an image of a Chinaman with yellow skin. And in a later edition, Geisel did modify the text and the image, but he could not bring himself to eradicate stereotypical and racist images from some of his children's books. So in 2021, the publisher decided to stop reprinting books by Dr. Seuss, which contained racist or stereotypical imagery. And there was a furious response from right-wing media that said this was another example of cancel culture. I don't see it that way. I see it as a decision of integrity that reflected what the publisher could do to live up to the values they say they believe in, rather than simply succumb to the popular culture's love of Dr. Seuss. So Reverend Slack's Berry Street address provides us with an appropriate critique of this state of institution of ours, as experienced through the lens of a Black, queer, trans, Unitarian Universalist minister who loves this faith enough to keep coming back despite microaggressions, despite having to deal with the dominance of white, hetero, transphobic, ableist culture that's a part of Unitarian Universalism. And this leads us back to covenant. The covenants we make, the covenants we break, and the covenants we attempt to keep. And that is why I wanted you to hear Russell Ballinger's story this morning. Now, Russ likely didn't know what Unity's covenants were when he stepped into the doors of Unity Church. He may not have read up in advance on Unity's ongoing and deepening commitment to anti-culturalism and anti-racism, but what he did experience firsthand, personally, was a congregation who attempts to live out and live into covenants that we profess, perhaps imperfectly, sometimes awkwardly, but ones that hold the center of our shared life together. So Reverend Slack's Berry Street lecture is both a critique of and a love letter to Unitarian Universalism. So here we are, on the corner of Mulberry and Berry Street, invoking our imagination of what a truly beloved community can look like, all while being grounded in what's really real and acknowledging the work that we have to do to make it possible. The corner of Mulberry Street and Berry Street, it isn't just an intersection, it's a crossroads. Which way do we go? Self-congratulating fantasy or honest engagement with reality? The choice, of course, it's up to us. circle wide. Draw it wider still. Draw a circle wide enough to encompass both reason and revelation. Wild flights of fancy with our roots in reality. May we soar with inspiration and aspiration, and always, always drawing the circle wider and wider to include all. Blessings, blessings on this day. Go in peace. Amen.